Well, friends, welcome back. We're still reading through the Bible in a year, man. We're almost a month in, I think, or so, um, at the end of this week, our fourth week, and we've covered a lot of ground already, right? We've covered all of Genesis, and we're working our way here very quickly now through Exodus as well. And there's a lot in here. I don't know about you, but I'm not bored yet. I'm more. Um, maybe overwhelmed, not in the amount of reading, although today's was a decent length, but just in the amount of different things in each day's reading. Like I would like to be able to just kind of focus in on one or two things. And some days I've done that, but there's just a lot of things. I feel like even when I talk about several things, I'm still leaving out a lot of things. And again, this is never going to be a verse by verse, comprehensive kind of thing. I'm going to point out some things that I find either significant, interesting, or puzzling, challenging. So I want to try to do both of those. I want to try to help you hopefully see some things that you may have missed, draw some things in the bigger picture. But I also want to be honest about sharing the things that are hard for me, confusing for me sometimes, or just that I'm wrestling with or thinking about. So all those are part of this journey in the Bible, and I want to kind of show you that I'm not I'm not in a place that I know all the answers by any means. But that's good stuff. So today we're in Exodus chapter 31 through 34. And this is really important. This is not a day to skip the reading on, for sure. Not that any days are, but this one particularly is substantive. So again, as we start, I would love to hear your thoughts or impressions or whatever. Like, what are you, as we get together here, hopefully some having done the reading. And if you're watching this later, you can even pause it and read it and then come back. Just shoot me a message. What are your impressions? What are your thoughts before, maybe before, not after I share some of mine? But of course, you can share anytime along the way. If I say something that you want to comment on, feel free to do that, whether it's now or you're watching later. Most people are watching later, typically only having a couple to a half dozen that are here at any given time. I'm usually here in the afternoons, sometime between 2:30 and 4, just depending on how my day is. Again, I'm trying to do this pretty consistently, not every day, but most days so far. And but I'm not trying to reorient my whole day to get here at one specific time. So that's kind of how that's working. Chapter 31 is interesting. I mentioned this in yesterday's reading, so I kind of won't belabor it. But it's really interesting how much of this first really long paragraph or section of chapter 31 takes the time to talk about these skilled craftsmen. They're named Bezaleel, son of Uri, the son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah. Interesting. And this is interesting. So God's telling this to Moses, and it's recorded. So this may seem less significant to us, but I think it's really interesting. And again, I don't want to push too much, but it may intersect with our lives in ways if we think about what we do outside of ministry. And remember back in the garden, back in creation, right? Being fruitful, multiplying, stewarding the earth in the garden, working it and keeping it. These things of life are important in God's sight. It's not like if you're not preaching or teaching or whatever, that you're not doing anything important. That's not the case at all, both in creation and as we see at various parts of the story as well. So again, this section, the first section of chapter 31, he names these people who are craftsmen. They're going to be responsible for building a lot of these things in the temple. And they're kind of like, I'm not sure what the word I'm looking for. They're kind of know all these trades somewhat. But look at what's said in verse 3. I have filled them with the Spirit of God. We have a little little mini Pentecost experience here. I filled them with the Spirit of God, with wisdom, with understanding, and with knowledge, and with all kinds of skills to make artistic designs in for work in gold, silver, bronze, stones to work in. So they're doing jewelry, they're doing work with precious metals, they're cutting gemstones, and to work in wood. And they're woodworkers and engaged in all kinds of crafts. So it's fascinating that, again, this kind of thing is stated about that God's Spirit is filling them and empowering them with wisdom and understanding to do these things. So I don't know, just take that and reflect on it a little bit if you choose to. I think it's kind of interesting. The second section in chapter 31 is about the Sabbath. We've seen the Sabbath already, saw it way back in Genesis, we've seen it in Exodus already, and we'll see it more. The Sabbath is a significant feature throughout. It'll show up in the New Testament in different ways. I'm not going to talk about all those further applications yet, but we will when we get to them at that time. Interesting statement. I underlined verse 13. So that you may know that I am the Lord who makes you holy. It's interesting, isn't it? Like we talked yesterday a lot about consecration, making something holy. Ultimately, God is the one, right, who makes us holy. We follow his voice, we listen to him, and as we walk in obedience, we become we're supposed to become more the people that he wants us to be, right? So God is the one who is making us holy. We can't read some of this without looking at the extent of the consequences. Is pretty serious, right? Verse 14, observe the Sabbath. We're told what that is, right? It's not working. Not working on the Sabbath day is the heart of the Sabbath. It could mean other things additionally, but that's the foundation. That's the core of it, is ceasing from work. The consequences is death. So it's serious, right? Anyone who desecrates it is to be put to death. Those who do any work on that day must be cut off from their people. For 6 days the work is to be done, but on the seventh day is a Sabbath rest, holy to the Lord. Whoever does work on the Sabbath day is to be put to death. Now, we're going to have to spend some time, being honest and wrestling with some of this stuff in here. And I'm going to kind of, I'm not going to ignore it. We're going to rest. For me, it's a wrestling thing. I'm not sure if it is for you. Maybe it's just cool, but people dying, I don't like that much. But that's what's happening here in various circumstances. I think the biggest mistake that we can make is this: to distance ourselves from this because it maybe makes us uncomfortable. If nothing else, this is intended to point us to, in this formational period, at least, this is extremely important. Okay, the Sabbath rest is not something that was practiced in cultures around, as far as I'm aware, and I've studied a little bit. It's unique. It's not maybe intuitive. Work more, get more, store more, whatever. But to God, it's non-negotiable. And maybe the extent of the consequence is intended, again, to do just that. To be like, well, God gave a bunch of rules. Do we really have to do this? Yeah, you really have to do this. All right, so let me look at verse 18 in chapter 31. When the Lord finished speaking to Moses on Mount Sinai, he gave him the 2 tablets of the covenant law, the tablets of stone inscribed by the finger of God. Isn't that an interesting expression, the finger of God? Can anybody, we'll do some Bible trivia along the way, and I'll be really impressed if you know. Some of these are a bit easier than others. Where does the finger of God show up in the New Testament? I think it's only one place. It's at least one place that I'm thinking of. I didn't recall the exact verse reference, but I do have it now for you. But the story. Does anybody know? Put a quick comment. So in Luke chapter 11, verse 20, Jesus says something like that. I'm not going to turn there. I'm paraphrasing. If I cast out demons by the finger of God, then the kingdom of God is upon you. So that's really interesting with the kingdom theology. We're going to talk a lot about that as we go along. But if God writes these tablets himself within, and this, there's these anthropomorphisms, right? God speaks in language like a human body, even though we know, God is spirit, if you will. So if he writes on these tablets by the finger of God, and Jesus cast out demons by the finger of God, there's a connection between the authority that Jesus is claiming, right? I think that makes sense, and what's using that language. So I don't know if that finger of God would have, like, for the contemporaries in the audience familiar with the scriptures, with the Torah, would have picked up on that phrase very specifically. I'm not sure, but maybe when we get to that in Luke's gospel, we'll come back and take another look at it. So chapter 32, I have to move a little faster here. Chapter 32 is a big deal, right? The golden calf. So Moses is up on the mountain meeting with the Lord. Chapter 32 again, verse 1. When the people saw that Moses was so long and coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, "Come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses, who brought us up out of Egypt," no big deal, right? It is a big deal. "We don't know what has happened to him." So are they thinking Moses is dead? Moses isn't coming back. Moses gave up and wandered off. Who knows? We'll go to a different sort of plan B. But as we've seen already, this idea of the exclusivity of worship and idolatry is way, way up there on the top of things with the death penalty, right? And all that. We've seen that already in our study here in Exodus. And they say to Aaron, and Aaron is a monster disappointment in this passage, right? Remember yesterday's reading? All these things about Aaron being set apart, being holy to the Lord, being all in, the blood on his, and anointing on his right thumb and his toe, head to toe. He's all in, holy to the Lord on his forehead, representing the people and all that. Aaron, what the heck is wrong with you? In chapter 32, he's a mess with this. Verse 2. Aaron answered them, "Take off your gold earrings. Your wives, your sons, and daughters are wearing." So yes, the men wore earrings too. Whether you like that or not, that was what it was at the day. But they didn't have any more. They just had the piercings like I have mine from when I was a teenager, and got my earring they said would heal, but never did. It's not fun. So they all took off their earrings. So, what should Aaron have said? "You guys, we can't do this. Like, God just saved us and deserves our loyalty and our worship." His job was to correct them, to rebuke them. But instead, he doesn't do that. Verse 4, he took what they handed him and made it into an idol cast in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. So we'll see when Moses confronts him, he kind of gives a lame answer, but they asked this and he's like, "Yeah, let's do it." And he's specifically crafting this idol that looks like a calf. And then they said, "These are your gods who brought you out of Egypt." This is a freaking train wreck. This is terrible. And it's got deadly consequences. We'll see. When Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of the calf and announced, "Tomorrow there will be a festival of the Lord to the Lord." So there's some, this is a little, there's some stuff to kind of figure out here. Are they, not abandoning God in their minds, but worshiping God, but kind of making his worship how they think it ought to be. Because these are your gods who brought you up out of Egypt. So they're recognizing this kind of miraculous provision, but taking it very much the wrong way. So think about this. I mean, this deserves more time really than I'm giving it. So it's like not maybe in their minds not a departure, but it absolutely is. And Aaron, in my thinking, maybe I'm reading too much ahead in my mind or something and being too critical of him, but I think this is, and when Moses' view, God's view, this is not like, well, they didn't know any better. Like, we'll see, like, this is bad, right? This is very bad. Verse 7, the Lord said to Moses, go down because your people whom you brought out of Egypt. Do you see that? So God's the one that brought them out of Egypt, but then they're misbehaving, and God says, you brought them out of Egypt. Well, I mean, they both did, right? It's part of the deal. It's like when our kids are misbehaving, and Heather says to me, your son, blah, 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 not our son, because, it's like, but I think there's like a thing here, like that maybe, I'm not entirely sure. Have become corrupt. They have been quick to turn away from what I have commanded them. Right? Not only have they drifted, they've been quick to turn away. One sign of things aren't happening as fast as we want, and bam, we're going to do things our own way. They've been quick to turn away from what I've commanded, and they have made for themselves an idol cast in the shape of a calf. This is right, 10 Commandments. No images. Why no images? Why no statues of God? Because, back to the garden, humans are the image of God. We are the icons. We are representing God into the world, and so there can be no inanimate object that does that. That is absolutely and totally and consistently off limits. No good. They have bowed, I'm still in verse 8, chapter 32. They have bowed down to it and sacrificed to it and said, these are your gods, Israel. Right. So God, even though Moses wasn't there to see, God sees, reporting to Moses. I have seen these people, he said to Moses. They are stiff-necked people. That's an expression for stubborn, rebellious, right? And this is fascinating. Maybe I'm just gonna spend not too bad on time compared to my normal. Thoughts or questions? Feel free to join the conversation here. It doesn't have to just be me. Talking. Look what God says. I love this. This for some of you, you won't like this section. It'll trouble you, but I find it fascinating. In verse 10, this is God, the Lord. Remember, the Lord, all caps, is Yahweh in Hebrew, the personal name of God. Now leave me alone, he says to Moses, so that my anger might burn against them, and that I might destroy them. Then I will make you into a great nation. Who's you? Moses. So God's saying, Moses, don't try to defend them. Don't try to, argue for their case. Just let me be angry. I'm going to destroy them, but all is not lost, Moses. We'll start over with you. Did it before. Started over with Abraham, with Noah initially, right? Started over with Abraham. We'll start over with you. Not the whole world flood, remember, because that was the covenant. We're not going to wipe everything out, but this unique thing about being a representative of God to the nations, right? So he says, I'll make you into the great nation. Abraham's promise will be just with your family line, not with them, because they're a mess. Okay, verse 11. But Moses sought the favor of the Lord his God. Lord, he said, why should your anger burn against your people, whom you brought out of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand? So this is interesting. Moses is not agreeing with God. How do you like that? But he is agreeing with God in the promises that he made. Okay, so it's just, but Moses again is like, remember with Abraham before Sodom and Gomorrah, like Jacob in a sense. These guys have a relationship with God. Now, we use that word maybe flippantly sometimes, but Moses has a relationship with God where he feels like he can interact, push back, question. And God, like with Abraham, plays along. Now, that's not to say that certainly that God doesn't know the outcome of this. Um, but it's fascinating how the story is narrated. And I just love that because it kind of throws us off thinking we kind of have everything figured out, I think at times. Right? So why should your anger burn against them, whom you brought? Remember, God says to Moses, you brought him out of Egypt. Moses reminds God, you brought him out of Egypt. You did it. And he says something to the effect of, God, your reputation is on the line here. If you think that's too much, look at what he says. Verse 12. Why should the Egyptians say, it was with evil intent that he brought them out, to kill them in the mountains and to wipe them off the face of the earth? Right? So the perception, what's the perception of the nations, the people that you just showed your power over to rescue your people? What's it going to look like to them if they hear, hey, they're all dead now? Their God wiped them out. How's that going to look? Okay, so this is really interesting stuff, I think. With the face of the earth. Turn, this is, again, I'm still in verse 12. This is Moses, again, to God. Turn from your fierce anger, relent, and do not bring disaster on your people. Okay? Wow. I mean, whoo, we've just looked at, in yesterday's reading, how like God's holiness and God's presence is like serious stuff. And it absolutely is, right? But Moses is engaged with God. And look at the reason that he gives, verse 13. Remember your servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, to whom you swore by your own self, right? There's no, the deepest, most significant thing is God. So God swore by his own self these covenant promises. And again, with remember, it's not so much just memory, but it's memory in action, acting on what's been said or done in the past, what's been promised by God. Remember, verse 13, your servants Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to whom you, in Israel, to whom you swore by your own self, I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and I will give your descendants all this land I promised them. Remember, I pointed out how important the covenant with Abraham is to the whole story. Like, if we don't understand the covenant, the aspects of it with Abraham, Genesis chapter 12 and following, we're not going to understand the biblical story, including the New Testament. Very, 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 very important. And again, it comes back right here in this story. And I will give your descendants all this land I promised them, and it will be their inheritance forever. So different aspects of God's promise to Abraham. So God says in verse 4, what would you think God would say? Moses, who are you to talk back to me? Moses, blast, whatever. Nope. Verse 14, then the Lord relented and did not bring on his people the disaster he had threatened. Is there some examples here about prayer, maybe? Huh? Wow. Talk about, the invitation we can read about, like in Hebrews, about approaching, the throne boldly. Wow. And Moses is coming. There's so many things about prayer I think we could bring out of this. He's not coming contrary, to God's will or with his own will or a selfish will. He's coming back to God's promises in prayer. Ooh, there's some stuff in here. But again, reflect on it. I just don't have time to spend too much time on each one of these things. Verse 15. Moses turned and went down from the mountain with the 2 tablets of the covenant law. Remember, this is all happening on the mountain. He gets the tablets. God says, this is what's going on. Moses says, hey, don't do it. He's got the tablets. He's coming down the mountain. They're inscribed on both sides, front and back. Right? That's not in our movies. That's not how it is, but that's how it is. Here, the tablets were the work of God. The writing was the writing of God engraved on the tablets. Really interesting that that's focused on, right? So, again, I want to go verse by verse, but I'm not going to. Verse 19, Moses approached the camp and saw the calf and the dancing. They're celebrating around this idol. And there could be more here going on, too, like the type of what's happening and the morality associated with it. I'm not going to go into that, the possibilities there, but there could be some nasty stuff going on here, possibly. So Moses goes down, verse 19 still, sees it, and his anger burned. And he threw the tablets out of his hand, breaking them to pieces at the foot of the mountain. And he took the calf the people had made and burned it in the fire. Then he ground it to powder, scattered it on the water, and made the Israelites drink it. He said to Aaron, "What did these people do to you that you led them into such great sin?" So Moses is holding Aaron, I think, appropriately responsible. Now, they could have, pushed him aside or tied him up or killed him or whatever, did what they wanted to, but they came to him and he didn't resist. He didn't stand up for God. Aaron is so stinking weak and disappointing, as so many people are, and we'll see again and again that the people are almost never the hero in these stories. It's always God's abundance and grace that provides. Verse 22, "Do not be angry, my Lord," he answered. "You know how prone these people are to evil. They said to me, 'Make us gods who will go before us.' As for this fellow Moses, who brought us out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him. So I said to them, 'Whoever has gold jewelry, take it off.'" Did you notice this in the reading? Then they gave me the gold, and I threw it in the fire, and out came this calf. Now, is that what happened? No! He fashioned the calf with the tool. We just read about that. And this is like like the story, like the kid breaks the lamp, and then they say the lamp got broken. Like, no, you broke the lamp. Aaron, you did it. Own up to it. But he doesn't, right? Because this is a mess. This is I think of some bad words to say about it, but it ain't good. In any case. And so Moses, he goes ahead and has a bunch of people killed. Here's the interesting thing that I'm going to wrestle with a little bit as we go through this biblical story in the big picture. When people do things that are generally positive people that aren't commanded by God, should we see God as authorizing, ordaining, or supporting what they do? That's going to be an interesting question for us to think about. And I just want to say this: don't necessarily assume yes. For example, let me use in this story something a little bit more mundane than Moses saying, "Hey, I think you should go through and kill a portion of these people." When he gets down, he sees it. He throws down the tablets and breaks them. Now, did God want him to do that? Was that a good idea? We're not told. Now, God is gracious and he gives them new tablets. But, was that a good idea? And so we need, Moses, we'll see, makes a huge mistake later that keeps him from entering the promised land. So we cannot assume, and Aaron, he's the priest, the main priest, and he does this. We cannot assume that generally positive characters, that the things that they choose to do and say are God authorized or ordained. Does that make sense? We can't assume that. Now, sometimes they may be, sometimes they will not. We even saw it with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They do boneheaded, stupid things, all of them. All of them. Moses did and will again. Aaron did. So just because a biblical person does something, don't assume that it's what God wants them to do. Now, there's enough things that are hard that God says, according to the scripture, to do. There's enough of that to wrestle with still. But I just want to bring that out because there's gonna be some times where we're gonna think about this, and it's one of those things that it's important because when people wrestle with it, they're gonna ask these questions. All right, man, this too much. I'm not a fan of whoever did this reading today because you put too much in one thing and God's presence. So let me fast forward to chapter 34. Oh my goodness. I'm half an hour in, guys. I can't keep you all day. But the end of chapter 33, God's presence. This I spent some time on it yesterday, I think, or the day before, so I won't belabor it again. But we can see it here. Please do the reading. Don't just listen to me. If you can, listen to it. The reading itself. It's not enough just to listen to me. You need to read it. But the theme of God's presence among them, it's so huge, right? We're not going to go if your presence doesn't go with us. We don't want to be in the promised land without your presence. We need your presence and the power of it. And then Moses, so I'm in chapter 33 now, right? And Moses, and there's this encounter when Moses says, that he wants to know God. So back in verse 13, if you're pleased with me, teach me your ways, Lord, so that I may know you. That's something you can reflect upon in your quiet time, right? In your personal stuff. That is a fantastic prayer. Pray that tonight, maybe. Lord, teach me your ways so that I may know you and continue to find favor with you. I love that. Excuse me. And so the Lord replies, my presence will go with you. Fascinating, right? God says in verse 14, my presence will go with you. And then Moses says in verse 15, if your presence does not go with us, do not send us up from here. So Moses is like making sure here, right? Like, God, don't just say that. Like, because if your presence doesn't really come, I'm not going. Because that's what they need. Right? That's what we need. This is huge. Isn't this great? There's some hard stuff in here, but there's some great stuff in here. Moses says, now show me your glory. And God does this where we have this phrase that pops up later in the Bible. I will have mercy on whom I have mercy. I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. So that's Satan's use. He's going to give Moses a certain experience of the depth of his presence, and it's beautiful. Chapter 34, our last chapter, he gets new stone tablets, right? The tablets of the 10 Commandments. And then this really foundational important point, I'll just say it without saying too much about it, hopefully, and then we're done for today. Because this again, it is very, 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 very important. Chapter 34, verse 5. This is in the midst of this encounter with God that Moses has. Then the Lord came down on the cloud and stood there with him and proclaimed his name, the Lord, right? Yahweh. And he passed in front of Moses proclaiming, the Lord, compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, right? Steadfast love. Very significant Hebrew word here. Maintaining love to thousands and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. So there's this theme both of the character of God being merciful, gracious, loving, consistent with his promises, but also there's this reality of it's not anything goes. You can't read this book of Exodus and following and just say, God's just loving, so do whatever you want. He's just going to give you a hug. No. There's depth to God's character, right? As we're seeing it revealed here, the immense love. I just kind of keep coming back in my mind this idea of God as a consuming fire, which is both beautiful and scary. God's law. So much today, guys. I'm gonna let you go. I don't know. Why am I sorry? You don't have to watch this, but um, there was just way too much today. Way, way, way too much to talk about. So, all right. Again, leave your thoughts. This doesn't have to be a one man band here. I'll see you hopefully tomorrow. Bye.